there is no need to adjust the caste system. It is functioning perfectly fine. Arundhati Roy, she quotes Ambedkar word to word, and I'll just pick up a small quotation. Gandhi, according to Arundhati Roy, had said that hereditary principle is an eternal principle of the caste system. To change it is create disorder. G. Aloysius, another, he goes so far as to argue that Gandhi wanted to establish the Indian nation itself on the decadent Varna idol, precisely to preserve the ascripted division of labor in society. So in sum, what all these scholars are arguing is that Gandhi was an outstanding product of the Hindu orthodox milieu, and according to them, Gandhi resisted any change in the basic social structure of the Hindu society, and he was the one who, more than anyone else, defended and validated the caste system. There are different levels of misunderstanding with such an interpretation. First, these critics of Gandhi, they base their understanding on certain statements of Gandhi, and moreover, those statements are not explained properly in the context that Gandhi had made those statements. And added to this, they also overlook Gandhi's overall actual practice. Did he practice the caste system in his own life or not? And the third problem is they see Gandhi as an unchanging person. So most of the quotations that these critics of Gandhi pick up are from the 1920s. So the statements made by Gandhi in the 30s and 40s are not particularly analyzed. But in fact, as Bipin Chandra has argued, Gandhi constantly experimented with truth and developed and changed his understanding of society, politics, and social change. And Gandhi's thought in these and other aspects were in constant evolution. To give you some examples, particularly on Gandhi's understanding of the caste system, in 1927, Gandhi had said to the Sri Lankans that if India could take pride in having sent you the message of Buddha, it has also to accept the humiliation of having sent you the curse of caste distinctions. By the 1930s, Gandhi was declaring that caste was and I quote, a handicap on progress and a social evil. By the 1940s, it had become an anachronism and which must go. So in this paper, what I'll argue is that Gandhi rejected critical aspects of the caste system, for example, untouchability from a very early age. Second, whatever may have been the statements that are quoted by his critics ad infinitum, in this, his actual practice is ignored, which again from a very early stage in his life, Gandhi challenged the caste system. And finally, over time, when some of Gandhi's statements came to be questioned, Gandhi began to explicitly explain what he meant when he made any statement about the caste system, and he explicitly critiqued the caste system in the severest terms. Untouchability, it was one of Gandhi's central concerns, and he identified with the untouchables more than the caste Hindus. As early as 1915, this is what Gandhi had to say: if it were proved to me that untouchability is an essential part of Hinduism, I for one would declare myself an open rebel against Hinduism. Significantly, Gandhi also worked for the ending of the caste system itself, which was responsible for the caste and other socio-economic disabilities of the untouchables. And Gandhi's beliefs on untouchability were backed by a force of lifetime of action. At the age of 12, in 1881, as early as 1881, Gandhi disregarded his mother's warning not to touch Yuka, who was an untouchable who used to clean latrines in their home. At that time, Gandhi had challenged his mother that untouchability is not sanctioned in Hindu religion. At age 18, Gandhi defied caste restrictions to go abroad. He was outcasted by his community, but Gandhi refused to perform penance. This strength of mind remained with Gandhi even when he was in South Africa from 1893 to 1914, where persons of all communities, religions, races, and castes, including the untouchables, stayed in his ashrams as members of his own family. And once, most of you must know, once when Kastuba was reluctant and even reticent to clean the chamber pot of one such family member, Gandhi had threatened to evict her from the house. Gandhi would always eat with people belonging to different religions and communities, including also the untouchables. After Gandhi returned to India in 1915, Gandhi had adopted an untouchable family to reside in his Satyagraha ashram, And immediately the Vaishnavas of Ahmedabad had stopped monetary help to the ashram because Gandhi took such a radical step. Following this, Gandhi did not bend down. He decided to relocate his ashram to the untouchable squatters in Ahmedabad itself. Now let's look at other aspects of the caste system where Gandhi challenged the caste system. Gandhi states that starting with his grandfather, for 3 generations, they had not been following their hereditary occupation that had been assigned to them by the caste system. Nor did he earn his bread and butter by following the hereditary occupation, and he also allowed his sons to choose whatever profession they liked. Not only Gandhi married his son Ramdas to someone who was from a different subcaste, but also allowed his other son Devdas to marry a girl who was from a different varna altogether. Gandhi also married off his adopted daughter Lakshmi, who was an untouchable, to a Brahmin boy in 1933. And Gandhi also took up activities that were strictly prohibited for his caste. For example, he worked as a scavenger, he worked as a barber or washerman, a cobbler, a tiller and a tailor. In fact, cleaning of toilets, it persisted all his life, and Gandhi also insisted that his co-workers and his family members should not follow this purity pollution taboo. Most important, none of Gandhi's ashrams were built on the basic principles of the caste system or Varnashrama Dharma, and none of the caste restrictions were observed in his ashram. This, as early as 1909, when in Hind Swaraj, Gandhi had argued that independence, if it is not accompanied by a deep change in social priorities, it would be pointless. So from the time of his return to India in 1915, what he did, he combined political activity with social reform. He pushed for the removal of untouchability as early as 1920 at the Nagpur session of the Indian National Congress that adopted the non-cooperation resolution. Moreover, as the eminent scholar of Gandhi, Anthony J. Parrell, writes, nowhere in Gandhi's entire political career do we find him attempting to restore the dharma of the discredited Varnashrama. Gandhi himself rejected such a possibility when he said in November 1927, this is what he had to say, and I quote, I have gone nowhere to defend Varna Dharma. I am the author of a Congress resolution for propagation of Khadi, establishment of Hindu-Muslim unity, and the removal of untouchability, the 3 pillars of Swaraj. But I have never placed establishment of Varnashrama Dharma as the 4th pillar. You cannot therefore accuse me of placing a wrong emphasis on Varnashrama Dharma. So from all this, you can see that Gandhi in his personal life rejected untouchability and relentlessly made efforts to eradicate it. The critics, by focusing on some of Gandhi's writings, they reach an erroneous conclusion that Gandhi never gave up his belief in Varnashrama Dharma. While just looking at his writings, they totally ignore his practice, while his practice were a clear denunciation of untouchability and caste prejudices. So I'm not saying Gandhi seemed to defend some of the aspects of the caste system when he comes to India in 1915, Varna and caste system, but to place it in a proper context, this was the situation which Gandhi faced in 1915. He faced the problem of both the colonial state using caste to weaken the national movement, and also the problem that the Orthodox Hindus, they were not yet ready to accept radical reforms. So Gandhi had to move cautiously in what he demanded from the Hindu society. I'll read a quote. This is written by one of the English journalists in India. It's a letter written to Gandhi. And this is what the letter had to say. Even if you, that is Gandhi, succeed in establishing Indian independence tomorrow, it would be wrecked and broken to pieces on the rock of caste. The British further asked, should not the Hindus wash their blood-stained hands before they ask the English to wash theirs? The other danger of the Orthodox Hindus, it came to a close reality in the 1920s when Gandhi declared that all the national schools should be open to the untouchables, and there was a strong reaction from these Orthodox Hindus. They said that unless untouchables were excluded from these national schools, they would support the British Raj. So as a result, Gandhi was gradual in what he demanded from the Hindu society. First, he identified himself as a Sanatani Hindu and even seemed to defend both caste and Varna. And he would repeatedly say that I would give up my life in defending Sanatan Dharma. But he makes an important distinction here. He says that Sanatan Dharma did not teach him to disrespect or despise the untouchables. And even when he appreciated restrictions on interdining and intercaste marriages, he said that these were minor these were minor parts in Varnashrama Dharma, and that a beginning should be made through intermarriage among the different subcastes, not among the different Varnas, but among the different subcastes. This was the beginning that he suggested. He declared in 1921 that the 4 divisions define a man's calling. They do not restrict social intercourse. In 1927, Gandhi openly declared that if Varnashrama goes to the dogs in the removal of untouchability, I shall not shed a tear. By April 1933, Gandhi had progressed further in his anti-untouchability drive when he asserted that Varna could not be perpetuated by birth. Because for him, a combination of natural qualities and natural aptitudes determined one's caste, not birth or heredity. Thus, at one stroke, you see Gandhi rejected the essence of the Varna or the caste system by asserting that it was not determined by birth or heredity. Another important fact is by 1935, when Ambedkar was criticizing Gandhi's views on untouchability, Gandhi's final position was caste had to go. In fact, Gandhi had given up defending the caste system even before Ambedkar's Annihilation of Caste got published on 15th May 1936. Gandhi gave the title Caste Has to Go to his 16th November 1935 article in Harijan, way before Ambedkar's Annihilation of Caste was published. And in this, he emphasized that the sooner public opinion abolishes caste, the better. In his 1936 debate with Ambedkar, Gandhi reiterated his rejection of the caste system, and he also openly affirmed his acceptance of and advocated for intercaste dining and marriages. By 1946, once Gandhi's views were freely expressed, he announced that couples could only marry in his Sevagram ashram on the condition that one party was a Harijan. So the problem was, it was not whether Gandhi took a radical view initially and moderate view initially and radical view later. The important point for Gandhi was how would the society accept his views. If he accepted if he took the position of intercaste marriages in the 1915 and the people did not, the Orthodox, the majority of the caste Hindus did not accept it, it held no good for Gandhi. So he moved gradually. Until 1920, what he said, Gandhi only tried to destroy the notion that physical contact with the untouchables would pollute a caste Hindu. From 1921 to 27, Gandhi demanded the entry of untouchables into public schools. And at the height of his prominence, at the peak of the anti-untouchability movement between 1932 and 34, Gandhi was in a position that he could demand more sacrifice from the caste Hindus in the form of penance and reparations. So from 1927 to 1932, he evidently took up the most contentious issue, that of temple entry for the untouchables. I'll conclude by reading out a quote from G. Ramachandra Rao, popularly known as Gora. He understood Gandhi's strategy towards caste this way. When Gandhi first undertook to remove untouchability, the problem of Varna Dharma was also there. It was easy to see intellectually even then that caste ought to go root and branch if untouchability was to be completely eradicated. But as a practical proposition, caste was not the immediate problem then. The problem was only the removal of untouchability, so he allowed caste to continue, though personally he observed no caste even then. Thus the work for the removal of untouchability progressed through the early stage, leaving the contradictions of the caste system untouched, and therefore without the complication of opposition from those who would resist the abolition of caste. When the stage had come where he found caste was a serious hindrance for further progress, he said that caste ought to go root and branch and proposed not only interdining but intermarriages as the means. A mere intellectual might read inconsistency in Gandhi's tolerance of caste earlier and his denunciation of it later, but to a practical man of non-violent creed, these are stages of progress and not principles of contradiction. Thank you.
Thank you. If there are any questions, very brief, quick questions. Yes, please. Will you please introduce yourself also?
I am Devendra Ingre. I am from Maharashtra. If you haven't seen any problem in Gandhian understanding of caste and untouchability, what was the problem with Ambedkar that he criticized Gandhi on that issue? That is first. The second one is that, can you explain the differences between Gandhian understanding of caste and untouchability and the Samrasta Vadi understanding of caste and untouchability? Is there any differences or there is similarities?
Right, thank you very much. What other questions? Any other questions, please? No? All right. Quick.
If I understand your first question correctly, Ambedkar's criticism of Gandhi's position of caste. So, as I explained, Ambedkar criticized Gandhi's position of caste first on the basis of statements that were made by him in the 1920s, and that too, I read Ambedkar's work, not mentioning in what context he had made those statements. In most, from the collected works, what I found, the statements that Gandhi made that seemed to defend the caste system first, Gandhi, I would not accept that Gandhi defended the caste system. The statements that he made were always an explanation of how the caste system existed in the ancient past, and it was a perversion of the original that was there in the 19th, 20th centuries. And second is Gandhi's, so Ambedkar, and second is, as I explained, the colonial state, the Christian missionaries, their activities, they were criticizing the Hindus on Hindu caste system. If Gandhi would have similarly criticized in those severe terms initially, the Orthodox Hindus, they would have gone on to the side of the British, and they would have let
If you would answer this second question, the first will also get answered. The second question is, what is the difference between the Gandhian and the Ambedkarite approach in handling the caste question? If you answer that, you should also be able to answer why did Ambedkar criticize Gandhi? Because there is a difference in approach. What is the difference? Right?
First question is that what problem has Ambedkar with Gandhi?
We got the same thing. Yeah.
And second is there any differences between Gandhian understanding of caste and untouchability and the Samrasta Manch Vadi understanding? Samrasta Manch means this Samrasta Sankalpana, RSS, the understanding, Samrastavad जो है RSS ने लाया हो, उनका जो जाति और अस्पृश्यता के बारे में कहना है, उसमें और गांधी जी में कुछ फर्क है?
This second question, I haven't read about the RSS understanding of caste, so I won't be able to answer that. Because Ambedkar's criticism, the main was the method of mobilization. Gandhi wanted to mobilize the Hindu community as a whole because it was the caste Hindus who were practicing untouchability. So, and Ambedkar's was, he was mobilizing only the untouchables.
Just is very simple. If you read that animation introduction of creation of caste, the basic Gandhi's, I mean that too in 20s. I will not talk about 20s. Though in South Africa situation is different. The difference is the deformative aspect of caste and the reconstruction aspect of society. Perhaps to me, Gandhi sees that how on humanitarian ground, the caste structure, I mean how the society needs to be reformed. It has to come up. I mean, leave aside for a minute anti-colonialism. Whereas Ambedkar is saying that this is only possible if you reconstruct the society. Annihilation of caste. And as far as before 1940, I have my opinion because in South Africa, he is leading a community life. And in community life, where people of all castes and religions were there. So he was telling that in that community, all were equal. So that is where Kasturiba will have to do the work which he referred to. It is from after his return, it is more an introspection and that gradually is coming to the point that this caste system, I mean, what I would say, the discrimination must be made. And here he is carrying a reforming way. I don't know, but this is what I generally see the difference of study between reformative and reconstructive.
You're done to make a comment, then we have to just let this be. It's a subject of great interest and we shall certainly continue discussing this. But unfortunately, there are two other people.
So, my point is that Ambedkar has written a bulky book on the criticism of Gandhian politics. He can't ignore all the points he raised in that book.
Yeah, I have taken that.
All the question of ignoring doesn't arise. That is precisely the point on which he is writing a whole thesis. He is not to ignore Ambedkar, but to find out why Ambedkar takes certain positions and what is the difference with Gandhi. There is no question of ignorance. Yes.
The one comment I'd like to make, Gandhi in the 1930s and 40s, he is talking about that there should be only one caste, the Kami caste. So I think that's a way of restructuring the society. He starts thinking later on.
Okay, we'll have to carry this afterwards because it is one of, in my understanding, one of the most complex issues that historians are facing today. Even how to handle this complete misrepresentation of Gandhi that goes on. Presenting him as a person against caste, in favor of casteism and against the Dalit. When he actually gives up public life in a sense, for politics, for 2 years and does nothing. At the peak of his career, from 32 to 34, he's doing nothing but fight casteism. So one needs to relook at it, and we are very happy that you've taken on the battle in a sense to unravel this most complex phenomenon. Okay, I will now ask Dr. Alok Bajpai to talk on Gandhi, Mahatma Gandhi's politics and Indian National Congress, some reflections. Present in about 10-12 minutes, then can have a little more time for discussion. Otherwise, there won't be any time.
थोड़ा सा हो ज़्यादा दीजिए. The main theme or undercurrent of my presentation is that the main domain of Gandhi's multifarious activities lies in the realms of politics. And within politics, he was essentially a mass political leader who was a practitioner of long-term revolutionary democratic politics with an strategic framework. And the crux of my paper is now, and the chief vehicle platform through which he did all his politics or most of his politics was Indian National Congress. If studied historically, his actions, concerns, political deliberations or orientations are undilutably linked with the fate of Indian National Congress. Dividing Gandhi from his chief political vehicle is not historically viable. Why this conundrum? In short, I would say that there are three main reasons. That at the one end we locate Gandhi on a very high pedestal, the highest soul or something like that, a Mahatma-based understanding of Gandhi. And it might have some value in this type of descriptions also, but it also hampers to understand Gandhi in historical perspective. In this Mahatma discourse, Gandhi is fixed on such heights that only his obedience or defiance catch the eyes. Gandhi, as one of the greatest mass leader, a historic fact, is overshadowed by all these metaphysical analyses. Second is thought domain studies on Gandhi, and that is to say economic thought, political thought, social thought, and this type of fragmentation of Gandhi for understanding him. My view is that he was not a philosopher per se, by practice or by otherwise. He was basically a political person, a political leader, and if we go through his routine for about 40 or 50 years, his routine would be anything like a political person and all those things. So this thought domain also in a way hinders to locate Gandhi in with reference to Congress and other things. And the third is anti-Congressism or a detest or apathy for Congress. This approach, prevalent in academics and political field too, chose an illusory path of making a gap between Gandhi and Congress. So, depoliticization of Gandhi has been very fashionable among even Gandhi admirers and lovers. Now, I come to the main points or arguments. To understand Gandhi's understanding of Indian National Congress, firstly, I should refer to an axiomatic test of Gandhi, that is Hind Swaraj. It is interesting to note that scholars have used Hind Swaraj as a swan song of Gandhi to portray him as they wish, but they keep almost mum on the concrete political portion of the text. Perhaps it does not fulfill the inner desire of distancing Gandhi from Congress. Anyway, Hind Swaraj starts with an appreciation of Indian National Congress and its then leaders. We all know that it was written in a question-answer format. The questioner asks, now I just paraphrase something like that to substantiate. The questioner asks about the construction of desire for home rule. Gandhi replies that desire gave rise to the Indian National Congress. In it, Gandhi fully grasped the historical value of nationalism and Congress' historic role in propagating it. The questioner again poses a doubt about it, and Gandhi replies, let us see. The Congress brought together Indians from different parts of India and enthused us with the idea of nationality. Again, the questioner does not stop. Again, he says that Congress is considered an instrument for perpetuating British rule. Gandhi repudiates this charge in these words, in a very strong words. Had not the grand old men of India prepared the soil, our young men could not have even spoken about home rule. Further, when questioner shows sign of impatience about Gandhi's appreciation of Congress and early Congress leaders, Gandhi bluntly rebukes him in strong words. You are impatient. I can't afford to be likewise. Remember the old proverb, that tree does not grow in one day. Gandhi cannot listen even a single word against Dadabhai Naoroji. He categorically calls him the father of nation or the author of nationalism. So, in fact, Gandhi in his early political career had recognized the historic role of Congress and its leaders with whom he made enduring contacts and remained with their touch even from South African days. Now, in some details about Gandhi's constructive work, constructive program and its position in reference to Congress. As a fact, a superficial understanding of Gandhi's constructive program has also been responsible to widening the so-called gap between Gandhi and Congress. It was Gandhi who introduced constructive program on all India basis through the platform of Congress in 1920. He forcefully made constructive program an integral part of Congress. Constructive programs were not enforced by Gandhi as a rival organization or a de-linked organization from the aegis of Congress. As a matter of fact, there has been an ideological constraint among Gandhians about the real nature, reason and essence of constructive program Gandhi propagated. It is a kind of taboo for them to treat it also a political activity for political purposes, more specifically to assist the Congress in multiple ways. This taboo resulted in their apathy or repulsion to sense the historical connection between Congress and Gandhi and Gandhi's constructive program. Gandhi's zeal for constructive program and other works are taken as a proof of Gandhi's progressive distancing from Congress. This is factually and historically inappropriate, if not wrong. If we go through collected works of Mahatma Gandhi, and especially Gandhi's speeches at various Gandhi Seva Sangh meetings, we may find the opposite of it. Professor Chandra, Bipan Chandra, very aptly called Gandhi's constructive work as a method of indirect politics. Here, with constructive work related with the question of Gandhi's, is the question of Gandhi's retirement from Congress in 1934. Due to time constraints, and I may not do, I would not go to the details of the circumstances of Gandhi's statement of retiring from Congress, but I would just say that it was just a political rhetoric and tactical gesture which had no actuality as far as Gandhi's activities afterwards are concerned. Now, I would quote some references to in 1940. At Gandhi Seva Sangh meeting, to make a connection or a relationship between constructive work, politics and their relation with Congress. In 1940, at Gandhi Seva Sangh meeting, he said, all constructive activity is in a sense part and parcel of the politics of the country. Politics pervades all our activities. I have not forbidden all political activity. For me, the foregoing constructive activities are an integral part of the solid political activity. One more quote only, and it is a very important quote to understand the relationship between Gandhi's constructive program and their relationship with Congress In 1937 at Hudli, in Gandhi Seva Sangh meeting, he replied to very wide-ranged queries and suspicions of hardcore Gandhians. He said, I quote, "One thing I wish to mention right at the outset. When I arrived in the morning, someone said that if Fachpur Congress was Jawaharlal's, the Hudli Congress was going to be Gandhi's. I know it was said in jest, but it pained me that such a thing should be said even in jest. It is a sin to imagine even in jest that there can be any rivalry between Jawaharlal and me or the Congress and the Gandhi Seva Sangh. The Gandhi Seva Sangh is not opposed to the Congress. It is meant to serve the Congress. How could the Sangh be opposed to the Congress when it was conceived in order to carry out the constructive program of the Congress? Let no one suggest in jest that there can possibly be any rivalry between the Sangh and the Congress, for it would be untruth. And it is forbidden to speak untruth even in jest. Anyone who hears it must promptly stop it. I wish to give you warning. We cannot even talk in such terms." In fact, every politics it is truer for democratic politics needs competent and genuine political communicators and workers. The fate of a political ideology and organization heavily rests upon its ability to attract activists of different backgrounds, different inclinations, and different political abilities. If lacking in this long-term but basic political work, the basic connection and empathy of the masses and the general goodwill of the overall political cultural milieu slowly erodes. Gandhi, through his constructive work methods, did the historical and crucial task of recruiting innumerable political workers, activists of different hues, political sympathizers, public enthusiasts of philanthropic pursuits, and many others to bring them in the orbit of Congress, and made it a formidable force against colonialism, rule, and for nation making. Sir, I have 5 minutes.
Quickly go through your points, otherwise they will get left out. So if you will elaborate them, but state your name.
The last point in this direction was my challenging axiomatic. I should speak in Hindustani. I think it would be good for me to be more fluent. So, and I will do more justice to it. इस जो गांधी और कांग्रेस का जो रिश्ता है, इसमें जो आखिरी बात मुझे कहनी थी वो ये थी कि जो एक कहा जाता है कि गांधी ने कांग्रेस को डिसबैंड करने की बात कही थी और उस बात में कितना सच्चाई है। तो मैंने ये पाया है कि जो गांधी की एगोनी है 46-47 की 1946-47 की, दैट वाज नॉट अगेंस्ट कांग्रेस, दैट वाज बिकॉज ही पर्सनली एंड एज ए पॉलिटिकल लीडर कुड नॉट फाइट अगेंस्ट कम्युनलिज्म एंड कम्युनल राइट्स and India got partitioned. So, तो जो वो उनकी एगोनी है उसको एक एंटी कांग्रेस फीलिंग के साथ में नहीं कोरिलेट किया जाना चाहिए। और इसके अलावा अगर आप 46-47 की गांधी की जो एक्टिविटीज देखें तो आप पाएंगे कि गांधी पूरी तरह से कांग्रेस की के कामों में खुद इंगेज रहे हैं। इवन दिसंबर 47 में उन्होंने जो AICC के रिजोल्यूशंस हैं उन्होंने खुद बताया कि जो ये 6 रिजोल्यूशंस हैं, यानी उनकी डेथ के 1 महीने पहले वो रिजोल्यूशंस वो मेरे खुद के रिजोल्यूशंस हैं। और जो टॉप लीडरशिप कांग्रेस की है उसके लिए वो पब्लिकली और हर तरह से उसको सपोर्ट करने की बात करते हैं। जब भी कोई उन कठिन दिनों में नेहरू या और किसी की बुराई करने के लिए आता है कि वहां पर ये नहीं हो रहा है, वहां पर ये नहीं कर रहे हैं, तो गांधी यही कहते हैं कि हमारे पास में इस देश में नेहरू, पटेल और राजेंद्र बाबू इनसे ज्यादा बेहतरीन लोग नहीं मौजूद हैं। तो सभी लोगों को, देश की जनता को इनका सपोर्ट करना चाहिए। एक्चुअली जो गांधी का वो जो डिसबैंडिंग नोट है वो एक तरह से कांग्रेस का रीऑर्गेनाइजेशन पोस्ट इंडिपेंडेंट पॉलिटिक्स के लिहाज से कैसे किया जाए उसको देखते हुए एक उनका वो टेंटेटिव ड्राफ्ट सा है, जो कि वो बहुत पहले से बल्कि कह रहा हूं थोड़ा पहले से कलेक्टेड वर्क्स में इस तरीके के डॉक्यूमेंटेशन है कि वो अपने क्लोज एड्स के साथ में और कांग्रेस के लीडर्स के साथ में वो रीऑर्गेनाइजेशन को डिस्कस भी कर रहे थे कि किस तरह से ये किया जा सकता है। और उसको इस तरह से कि गांधी कांग्रेस से उनका मन हट चुका था और वो चाहते थे कि अब काम इसका खत्म हो गया, वो बंद कर दी जाए, वो इस सेंस में नहीं था। वो कांग्रेस को जैसे उन्होंने 1920 में उस समय की जो प्रिवेलिंग सिचुएशंस थी उनको देखते हुए एक उसका रीऑर्गेनाइजेशन किया था, कॉन्स्ट्रक्टिव प्रोग्राम को उसमें ऑल इंडिया बेसिस पे जोड़ा था, उसी तरह से उनके दिमाग में चूंकि प्राइमरी कंट्राडिक्शन कॉलोनियल रूल का जा चुका था, तो उस लिहाज से कुछ वो एक मैकेनिज्म निकालना चाहते थे कि एक जो कॉन्स्ट्रक्टिव वर्कर्स का एक इतना बड़ा पूरे देश में नेटवर्क है और अब प्रायोरिटीज चेंज हो गई हैं, तो किस तरीके से हम उनको एक नया डायरेक्शन और एक कैसे ये दे सकें कि ये देश के लिए भी बेहतर हो और शायद कांग्रेस के लिए भी बेहतर हो। तो थैंक यू।
Before I open for questions, again, brief questions, one or two. I just wanted to say, Alok, you're absolutely right that when people quote Gandhiji saying that he wanted to disband the Congress, he will be talking about reorganizing it, making it capable of meeting the new situation. With imperialism gone, when the movement has become government, what are they to do? And you might remember that in the same document where he makes this statement, he also says that if the Indian National Congress dies, the nation dies. So there is a question of this saying, so the Congress should be disbanded. It is a total misuse. It has been politically misused. He didn't want the idea of the Indian National Congress to die upon. Questions, please. While you're thinking of your questions, we'll get the third presentation made and then take the questions together. All right? Because we are really running out of time, so forgive me for doing this. The third presenter is Dr. Richa Raj from the University of Delhi. She is going to speak on does economic progress clash with real moral progress? A critical response by Gandhi.
A very good afternoon. I'm extremely grateful to the Indian History Congress for giving me this opportunity to present a paper on Gandhi in the presence of such eminent scholars of history. I feel humbled. I stand here not as an expert on Gandhi, but only as a student. In a speech at Muir Central College, Allahabad, in December 1916, addressing the economic society of that college, Gandhi asked this perennial question: does economic progress clash with real progress? He admitted that he had not read, at least in 1916, books on economics by well-known authorities such as Mill, Marshall, Adam Smith, and so on. But he listened to the little voice within him. What followed, therefore, in his engagement with students of economics and sympathizers of it was a critique of economic progress, by which he meant material advancement without limit, and that it was antagonistic to real progress, by which he meant moral progress. Giving examples of Jesus, Muhammad, Buddha, Nanak, Kabir, Chaitanya, Shankara, and other religious figures, not emphasizing their religious doctrine, but only their simple way of life, he elaborated, I hold that economic progress, in the sense I have put it, is antagonistic to real progress. Hence, the ancient ideal has been the limitation of activities promoting wealth. This does not put an end to all material ambition. We should still have, as we have always had in our midst, people who have made the pursuit of wealth their aim in life, but we have also recognized that it is a fall from the ideal, that you cannot serve God and Mammon in an economic truth of the highest value. In a sublime abstract fashion, characteristic of a philosopher, Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi left his formulations open-ended and revisited many of them, especially the issues of modernity and science. Gandhi's socio-economic philosophy was not based on any set formula, but it was open to evolution according to the need of the time. The problem that confronted India during the British Raj was poverty, and Gandhi's reaction to the demoralizing influence of the poverty of the masses of the country is clearly reflected in the economic doctrines he propagated. On no other subject did Gandhi's views undergo such a progressive change as on what are called economic subjects, industrialism and labor-capital relations. The path that he took from his Hind Swaraj days of 1909 to the late 40s was underlined by a simultaneous reorientation of his outlook within a basic pattern. Within the context of time and the situation confronting him, the economic devices and institutions formulated by Gandhi, such as the charkha, village self-sufficiency, trusteeship, sought to exemplify the basic values of limitation of wants, of sharing of wealth, of a sarvodaya or unto the last, which was relevant to the operation of the economic system. Therefore, we find that Gandhi denounced capitalism for its soul-killing process and the economic inequality generated by it. Yet, he believed in the right relations between capital and labor. The idea of class war did not appeal to him, for he was a messenger of non-violence. He sought to bring about economic equality through non-violence by converting the people to his point of view by harnessing the forces of love as against hatred. Thus, economics and ethics were not two separate entities for Gandhi. In 1934, he wrote, "Our socialism or communism should be based on non-violence and on harmonious cooperation of labor and capital, landlord and tenant." He wanted India to assimilate the socialism of the spinning wheel. His reaction against factory civilization and his plea for substituting it by self-sufficing decentralized village economy was rooted in his revulsion against the concentration of economic power in the hands of a few and his economic ideal of an egalitarian humanistic society. Generally, scholars believe that looking at his treatise of Hind Swaraj, which he wrote in 1909, he has given a critique of modernity, that he is generally critical of modernity. But we must understand that Gandhi endorsed many concepts of what is defined as modernity, a word that dates back to the 18th century in Europe with the rise of enlightenment, right? And therefore, there are many concepts of modernity that Gandhi actually endorses, such as the doctrine of human rights, the fundamental quality of all humans, the right of all to democratic representation, the principle of governance through persuasion rather than coercion, and so on. Therefore, his critique of modernity is a selective one. He is not entirely rubbishing modernity. Gandhi's economic ideal is rooted in non-violence, as I emphasized, and that it was based on the amelioration of the conditions of the masses, even as he made a distinction between material progress and moral progress. From his standpoint, Gandhi tended to reject even the idea of large-scale industrialization based on modern machinery and envisaged Indian development on the principle of a balance between agriculture and small industry, excluding the use of labor-saving modern technology and the maximum utilization of the labor resources of the community. Now here, because there is very less time at our disposal here in this session, I just wanted to bring about, while looking at Gandhian economic theory, I wanted to see whether how much he departs from the current theorists who have been writing on neoliberalism, either in favor of it or against it. So neoliberalism, the neoliberal theory, looks at itself as a theory of liberty, meaning essentially that the unhampered market society implies greater freedom than any other existing alternative. However, this theory has been criticized by scholars like Amartya Sen, and this theory absolutely negates the idea that citizens should be entitled to other rights than those of speech, religion, and property. According to this theory, the social rights, that is the right to medical attention, education, work, and welfare, are not considered real human rights, and trying to assert these rights can only lead to a dangerous enlargement of state supremacy and devaluation of the status of rights. Gandhi, however, radically redefined the concept of liberty or freedom. Whereas on one hand, the proponents of neoliberalism feel that with a free market economy would also define freedom for the people, and that freedom is purely a legal conception and it's not a political one. Therefore, law, liberty and property are intricately intertwined in the schema. However, for Gandhi had radically redefined the concept of liberty or freedom. He stressed freedom, but of course in a very different way. For him, freedom consisted not in choice per se, but the freedom in making choices that were in harmony with and capable of being integrated into one's own way of life. Gandhi, as Parekh also tells us, subsumed freedom under truth and offered a novel way of defending it. Only the free man, that is, one able to make his choices and decisions himself, was able to discover, develop, and live by his unique ontological truth. Therefore, for Gandhi, Gandhi's ideas regarding freedom is definitely very different from the current, the neoliberal theory of freedom. At the same time, one cannot also define him as in a very standard, as a standard socialist person. He thought very radically different from the current neoliberal theory, but it is also not a standard socialist theory in the sense that it is a different kind of socialism which is also rooted in religion. And religion, of course, for him, religion definitely meant morality rather than any dogmatic doctrine. So therefore, for him, the idiom of religion is used with a very different meaning from that of a fundamentalist one. The soul is supreme, and therefore soul force is the foundation on which man must build. For him, it meant truth arrived at through non-violent means. Gandhi differed most radically from the socialists and the communists over their belief in the necessity for class struggle. Gandhi saw this as one that entailed violence, that inculcated hatred and created a distance between its opponents. He argued instead for aparigraha or non-possession, which meant that each would hold whatever assets they possessed in trust for the good of the society. Thus, the rich were required to use their wealth for the benefit of those who worked for them, while laborers were required to provide their labor to those who needed it, that is, their employers. In Gandhi's understanding then, his socialism meant unto the last. It meant full expression of one's personality and complete individual freedom for everyone. In the words, I'll end the presentation with the words of Jayaprakash Narayan in 1953, who wrote on Gandhi, saying that Gandhi does not concentrate on the capture of power, nor depend on the power of the state, but goes to the people and helps them to effect the revolution in their lives and consequently revolution in the life of the community. So Gandhian socialism wishes to advance by cutting across classes, while other socialisms set class against class. Thank you.
We'll take the questions together. Richa, I like your drawing upon the Enlightenment and the connection with Gandhi. I'm not sure you've read this book by Pat Fernie on precisely this, who examines the Enlightenment and to what extent it had Enlightenment values has actually been appropriated in England, France, Turkey, Iran and India. And comes to the conclusion that Gandhi was closest to the Enlightenment. If Enlightenment empowering of the people, if Enlightenment living the difference, if Enlightenment democracy, then clearly Gandhi was much closer to it than supposedly countries which benefited from Enlightenment and created some of the world's greatest oppressive systems and machinery for oppression of the people.
Yes.
So that you must read this. No? Questions, please. Questions, comments? We have a few minutes. Please.
I have a question from Vajpayee.
Yes.
When you were talking about not intending, Gandhi being a very political creature and not intending to disband Congress as people have thought of the Indian National Congress? Do you have in mind a certain political party which fights elections, runs governments, decides on ordinances and bills and acts? Do you think Gandhi thought in that manner to keep that a political apparatus, to think of it as a continuity of the freedom struggle of India?
ये तो कहना मुश्किल है कि जो आज़ादी के बाद की कांग्रेस है, खासतौर से नेहरू के बाद की कांग्रेस, उसके बारे में अगर गांधी जिंदा रहते तो क्या सोचते, तो स्पेकुलेशन हो सकता है किस तरह से किया जाए। लेकिन एक चीज़ जो मैं कहना चाहूँगा कि गांधी ने 1921 में हिंद स्वराज के बारे में एक बात कही थी। हिंद स्वराज वो बेसिक टेक्स्ट है जिसको लेके गांधी को बहुत बार एंटी मॉडर्निटी, एंटी स्टेट और तमाम तरह से पोर्ट्रेट किया जाता है। तो गांधी ने जो कहा हिंद स्वराज के बारे में 1921 में, वो काफी जरूरी है जानना, और शायद वो आपके सवाल का थोड़ा सा जवाब हो कि जो एक आइडियल स्टेट है गांधी के दिमाग में वो क्या है। तो गांधी कहते हैं कि मैंने जो हिंद स्वराज में कहा है, लोगों ने उसका बहुत गलत मतलब निकाला है। जो मेरे जहन में एक नक्शा है एक आदर्श राज्य का, हिंदुस्तान का, उसमें ऐसा नहीं कि उसमें सेना नहीं होगी, या उसमें पुलिस नहीं होगी, या उसमें जुडिशरी नहीं होगी। ये सारी चीजें होंगी, लेकिन उनका कैरेक्टर और काम करने का तरीका और किस तरह से वो फंक्शन करेंगे वो अलग बात है। तो एक वो कोई स्टेटलेस डेमोक्रेसी की तरह से वो नहीं सोचते थे। हाँ वो मैं समझ रहा हूँ, लेकिन मैं अंदाजा कैसे लगा सकता हूँ कि वो गांधी कैसे सोचते थे। हाँ, अब जैसे कश्मीर, हम लोग थोड़े से इंफरेंसेस निकाल सकते हैं। जैसे कश्मीर पर जो हुआ था तब तो गांधी जी थे, तो उन्होंने मिलिट्री इंटरवेंशन की परमिशन दी। उन्होंने कहा कि आप कर सकते हैं।
मेरा सवाल है जो apparatus गांधी जी ने एक समय में लीड किया और एक समय में उसे थोड़ा सा डिस्टेंस बनाया। उस apparatus से डिस्टेंस में, ये एक फैक्ट है कि उन्होंने डिस्टेंस बनाया, और किस लिए बनाया, क्यों बनाया, इस पर बड़ी डिबेट हो सकती है। लेकिन एक apparatus खड़ा था 1885 से, और वो भारत की आज़ादी की लड़ाई का दूसरा मेजर फेज जो था, उसमें वो बहुत महत्वपूर्ण apparatus था। वो apparatus एक सत्ता के गेम में एक हिस्सा बनने के लिए, जो उसका हिस्सा था, ये होम रूल शुरुआत जब हो गई तभी 1920 से 30 से ही गांधी जी ने एक उसके कैरेक्टर के ऊपर लिखना और बोलना शुरू किया था। पत्रों में बहुत कुछ लिखा। मैं सिर्फ आपसे ये निवेदन करना चाहूंगी, क्योंकि आप इसको इस पे लंबी बात अभी नहीं करेंगे, समय आपके पास कम है, लेकिन आप उन पत्रों को, उन विचारों को और उनके खासकर रामगढ़ कांग्रेस के उनके भाषण को आप जरूर से पढ़िएगा, देखिएगा कि वही apparatus जो भारत की आज़ादी की लड़ाई के लिए जेल भरने के लिए था, वही apparatus भारत के लोगों को जेल में डालने के लिए बनना था क्या? नहीं, उसकी चर्चा होती है वो बात, क्योंकि काफी कुछ धीरे धीरे जो इंटरनल गवर्नेंस बहुत सारा शुरू कर चुके थे, और बहुत जगह वो जो apparatus फ्रीडम स्ट्रगल था वो राज भी करने लगा। उसके चीफ मिनिस्टर्स होने लगे, प्राइम मिनिस्टर कहलाते थे। तो ये जो एक पॉलिटिकल क्वेश्चन है वो गांधी जी को मथने लगा था, और ऐसा नहीं है कि हमें कोई स्पेकुलेट करना पड़ेगा। उन्होंने बहुत कुछ लिखा। मैं सिर्फ आपसे रिक्वेस्ट करना चाहती हूँ कि उसको आप पढ़ेंगे और उस पर कभी और आपसे चर्चा हम करेंगे। एक छोटा सा आई वॉन्ट टू ड्रॉ अटेंशन ऑफ चाची towards a small incident in 1945 when UNESCO was being formed. Sir Julian Huxley was supposed to be the coordinator, and he was writing to all philosophers, and one of the greatest was Mahatma Gandhi. He wrote to him about they wanted to take out a universal declaration of human rights. So he said, what is your concept of rights? And Gandhiji's reply, because we were talking of freedom and individual freedom, so Gandhiji's reply was very clear. He says that I learned of freedom and rights on my unlettered mother's knees, and she told me that there is no right from which does not accrue a duty. So for Gandhi, an individual's right is always tied up with responsibility. There are no irresponsible rights like in the free market. The free market is full of irresponsible rights. Whereas for in Gandhi, rights are always circumscribed to responsibility.
Ma'am, you introduce yourself so that they
I'm
can...
Radha Shankar. I'll be speaking tomorrow on Kasmona.
Okay. Would you like to discuss?
Absolutely, I agree with you that Gandhi, when he spoke about rights, it always came with a corollary duty.
But you know that Julian Huxley did not include it in the University Petition.
That's
He
why
wrote to Gandhi, got a written reply, but he never even mentioned. That's the word for you.
Yeah, absolutely. But even if you look at Gandhi's ideas for education as well, then he's talking about a complete democratization. Even when we're talking about languages as well, the language question too, he's actually for the vernacularization of education and so on. Yes, absolutely. So when this entire question of rights as opposed to the privatization, sector is concerned, what is happening in education today as well is really something that is raises a lot of concern, especially in higher education, the way the government is trying to pull back funding and completely washing their hands away from what the other duty of the state must be. So it is therefore very important to revisit the ideas of Gandhi on economy, especially even in the context of what is happening in education.
It was I think, Alok, it was more a comment than a question. And you're absolutely right that there is no question of Gandhi not being agitated. That I think was part of what he was trying to say, that Gandhi was extremely agitated about what this organization is to do in a completely new situation.
Yes,
and it is one of the greatest sort of tragedies that he died.
He recorded it. Yes,
right. Correct. There is no dispute on that.
Radha, thank you for the comments. मैं तीन बातें जानना चाहूँगा. एक तो कि was Gandhi against political power as such or not? ये एक ऐसा क्वेश्चन रहा है जो बहुत ही कंफ्यूज करता रहा है कि गांधी ने जो पावर को या पॉलिटिकल पावर को क्रिटिसाइज किया है वो एक्चुअली एक तरह से वो कॉलोनियल पॉलिटिकल पावर है जिसको वो क्योंकि वो एकदम कंक्रीट में ही ज्यादा बात कर रहे हैं. दूसरी बात जो गांधी का कांग्रेस का इकोनॉमिक क्रिटिसिज्म है, ये वो कांग्रेस मिनिस्ट्रीज का या बाद में भी वो हमेशा चलता रहा, वो कोई लेट 40s की ही बात नहीं है. वो एक जो उनका रिव्यू करने का तरीका है वो एक जो ऑर्गेनाइजेशन का एक अनडिस्प्यूटेड टॉप मोस्ट लीडर वो किस तरीके से इंट्रोस्पेक्शन में भी खुद भी जाना चाहता है, लोगों को इन्वोक करना चाहता है, पार्टी के लोगों को, तो वो उस लेवल का है. वो डिस्टेंसिंग कांग्रेस से उसको डिस्टेंसिंग की तरह से देखना थोड़ा सा. और तीसरी बात है कि ये जो मास मूवमेंट की एक जो पॉलिटिक्स थी जो गांधी जिसके मास्टर थे सत्याग्रह और ये सारी सब चीजें, तो वो जो गांधी ने उसको जो तैयार किया था वो कॉलोनियल स्टेट को ध्यान में रख के ही ज्यादा तैयार किया था. बाद में उन डिवाइसेस को किस तरह से इस्तेमाल होना है ये बहुत कुछ अलग बात है, क्योंकि जो यहाँ तक से है कि जो कॉन्स्टिट्यूएंट असेंबली है गांधी उसको भी कहते हैं कि इस समय कॉन्स्टिट्यूएंट असेंबली में शामिल होना और उसे सपोर्ट करना एक तरह का सत्याग्रह है. तो वो बहुत तरह से उस चीजों को कहते हैं.
Two questions.
After achieving independence, Gandhi suggested that Congress party should be dissolved.
And you were probably not there when he spoke about it. And we had already decided.
The second
question, yes.
When the thinking process about the National Congress, Indian National Congress, when that the apex level of the before independence came to the point of the leadership between the Sardar Patel and Nehru. So he favored only Nehru, not Sardar Patel got more votes actually. He preferred the leadership of Nehru rather than Sardar Patel. The entire Congress party supported the leadership of Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel. He was got more votes. So why there is a twist in his thought process?
गांधी लहर को हमेशा से ज्यादा सपोर्ट करते आ रहे थे. वो केवल 46-47 की बात नहीं है. अगर आप 31 या 27, 28 की भी बात करें तो गांधी को नेहरू को लेके ज़्यादा कॉन्फिडेंस था कि ये देश को आगे ले जाने में तमाम दूसरे लोगों से ज़्यादा कॉम्पिटेंट है, तो इसमें तो कोई डिस्प्यूट नहीं है। रही बात कि कांग्रेस पार्टी जो है वो पटेल के साथ ज़्यादा थी, नेहरू के खिलाफ थी, ऐसा कोई ये स्पेकुलेशन है। ये पॉलिटिकल अंडरस्टैंडिंग में बहुत सारे स्पेकुलेशंस बनाए जाते हैं। आप ऐसे देखिए कि अगर कांग्रेस पार्टी पटेल के साथ थी और नेहरू माइनॉरिटी में थे, अगर ये फैक्ट है हिस्टोरिक, तो क्या ये फैक्ट हमें एक्चुअल में दिखाई पड़ता है? एक्चुअल में नहीं दिखाई पड़ता है। तो गॉसिप्स, बहुत सारे एक्यूजेशंस या जो इनर पार्टी कॉन्फ्लिक्ट्स होते हैं, वो जिस लेवल पे हो हमें उसी लेवल पे रख के उनको समझना होता है, ना कि जिसको कहते हैं कि तिल का ताड़ बनाना जिसको कहते हैं। तो हम लोग अक्सर तिल का ताड़ बना देते हैं और ये ऐसा है। अगर होता तो आप पटेल की स्पीचेस देखिए, पटेल ने कभी भी नेहरू के अगेंस्ट नहीं बोला। पटेल ने कभी किसी से पर्सनली कन्फाइड नहीं किया कि गांधी नेहरू को ज्यादा क्यों मानते हैं, मुझे नहीं मानते हैं। एक इंस्टेंस कभी नहीं है।
इनफैक्ट पटेल कहते हैं,
हाँ, और बल्कि पटेल खुद कहते हैं कि नेहरू इज मोर कॉम्पिटेंट देन मी, जो हमारे पास है पोजीशन सामने। तो ये सारा जो है वो एक एंटी कांग्रेसिज्म, वो एक अलग पूरी डिबेट है और बहस है कि कहां से आखिर गांधी को कांग्रेस से अलग रख के हम एक बहुत ही ऊंचा स्टेचर देते हैं, और जिससे गांधी हमारे लिए वनरेबल तो बहुत बने रहे और लेकिन यूजफुल न रह जाए। अगर हम उनको पॉलिटिकल फील्ड में गांधी की जो इंसाइट्स हैं, अगर हम उनको इस्तेमाल करने लगे, उनको समझने लगे, तो शायद देश में रिवोल्यूशनरी डेमोक्रेटिक पॉलिटिक्स वही होगी।
But statue is admin of India, 182 meters statue बने मोदी साहब,
वो अलग है।
अभी इसकी डिस्कशन अभी नहीं शुरू कर रहे। But as you were saying, that Patel famously himself said in one event when thousands of people had collected and Nehru and Patel were on the stage, Patel pointed to Nehru and said that the people are there for you, not for me. So Patel knew where the people were. This whole accusation that the people were for Patel and Gandhiji sort of put his man there. It is so much based on current kind of politics. We are back projecting the travesty of politics that happens today into one of the greatest movements of the world, which is completely unfair.
Also, so they were also together on the banning of the RSS as well. Both of them were together. There was absolutely
The
no contradiction.
Nehru-Patel correspondence which is published is well worth a read for you. There is nothing of this sort of dispute which is being made. If all that is being made out today, it would appear that the national movement consisted of leaders who were fighting essentially amongst each other rather than the British, isn't it? But that is not how it was. Thank you very much. The speakers who have all raised very important issues, as you can see. We are not going to sort them out in a hurry, but I do believe that the questions that you people have raised need to be taken forward. And Sudha, we didn't have so much of a discussion on yours because most people arrived after your presentation. So don't get discouraged at that. Thank you very much. The next session will start in 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you.